As you go into the week, I've got a couple of comments about some of the stuff we should be going and looking into. We're usually 3 people, but Tom ametuabandon tena after his mocks aliambiwa pewa holiday sahi ako Dar es Salaam. So Tom, ukipeleka daladala kwenda kukula sijui wapi, you just remember us.
Mapochopocho ya Samia, tafadhali tukumbuke pale.
Walking on the nice sandy beaches. So na Eric pia hatuja kusahau. Eric Mugendi na Tom Mkwana. Yes. We are seeing you and we are jealous. Na mtarudi tu.
And we are judging you. Bring us something nice, but we are judging you.
Kabisa, kabisa. Now, topic number 1. So, Kenyans have been complaining about the implementation of SHA since it's been implemented about 4 months. And they've been saying the same thing over and over and over again. And last week, I believe in a parliament, not a parliamentary meeting, it was a meeting of parliamentarians. It was at the coast.
It was their retreat.
It was their retreat, right?
Yes.
Because they're on recess right now. The Ministry of Health is having a tough time selling SHA. They even had a tough time justifying why they sought the arrest of Grace Mule. And you've been following SHA like this. I've been watching your what do you call them? Your segments on Instagram.
Yes.
So what are your thoughts? Like, what do you think accounts for this about face by the members of parliament?
Okay, first of all, I was very surprised that MPs could pivot in this way, and just like with zero shame. Like they didn't even try and like win people over slowly. Like the first thing was like, no, we are opposed to SHA because 2.75% deductions is too high. And I'm like, you are the ones who passed it, like in parliament.
Unanimously, blindly.
I would understand if Sudi passed it, but like some of you can actually read, you know, like you people.
Oh yes, Sudi. Oh yes, Sudi. Like that guy gets such a bad rap. Like
it's true,
every bad decision ni Sudi.
Look, what is his name? The majority leader of parliament right now?
Kimani Ichung'wah.
That guy. He said Sudi sets the agenda for parliament. So I am judging all of you, all 300 plus of you. Like, you can read. Why are you letting this guy set the agenda if he doesn't know what it means? You know? So that's the first thing. But like, the whole SHA story to me is a dehumanizing effort by the government. And I don't think anything they're trying to change or pivot from is going to make us forget that people have been harmed by this policy. People are in so much limbo trying to figure out, where do I go? How do I get funding? Apparently, you're supposed to pay for a year before it can be activated. And I'm like, that's crazy. A lot of people live paycheck to paycheck. Some of us don't have like consistent salaries. Like, how is that a policy that you have in place? And while understanding like there's so much unemployment, there's stuff that you have not even solved. Like, you are representatives of your constituents. You know the kind of suffering that they go through. So this is not a surprise to them.
Yeah, but you know, the thing, so I agree to this extent.
Yes.
That SHA, the way it's being implemented is really problematic.
Yes.
Number one, and number two, the fact that there's no appreciation for where people get the money from is really a serious issue. But we have a healthcare crisis in this country, crises in this country, and we need a UHC sort of safety net. And the question that I ask people, and this is not to gaslight people and say, what's your solution? But really, what then would be the way to do something like this on a national scale that has impact, can be done immediately, and obviously for political reasons can be done in or under 5 years?
Okay, I think saying it can be done in under 5 years is probably a difficult ask, but you can have goalposts. You can have milestones that you want to be able to achieve, because universal healthcare coverage should not just be about the coverage, about the money. It should also mostly be about the access. So they could pilot a program. If they want to introduce something new, they could pilot it. Say, we are taking a small village.
But that's what they've been doing. So they piloted it in Uhuru's term. They piloted it in Makueni. They piloted it, I believe, in Kisumu. They also piloted it. There's one other county where they piloted it, and there was some sort of success. And if you're seeing what's happening in Murang'a with, what's the governor's name? Of Murang'a. Kang'ata, with Kang'ata Care. Kang'ata Care is sort of an extrapolation of UHC that seems to be working.
You see what you just said? It's like we kind of have to involve, because healthcare was devolved. It's in the counties. But a family member of mine who works for one of the county hospitals told me a lot of the money that's going to the counties is going into repainting wards or like launching a road into the hospital. Like the money is not going into the healthcare services, taking care of the doctors, the nurses, and those are the people who are actually at the helm of helping people. So if you're going to pilot a program and extend it outwards, you have to make sure that the priorities for the money that's being spent and being put into the program goes into the healthcare workers and into serving the patients first.
But the Kenyan question becomes, watu watakula aje? If you're actually thinking about healthcare, watu watakula aje?
But then, when you go with unga to the hospital,
no, I'm not saying watu raia, watu wenye wanajenga hizi mabarabara, how are they going to eat?
Honestly, greed itabidi imeteka backseat. Like you can't have both greed and healthcare services.
I'm being unfair. But on the about face of the members of parliament. So on the one hand, I feel like, where were you guys all of these 2 years when people had been complaining about this? But on the other, when I hear people like Salasia standing up and for all of his sins and the reputation that he has as being a court jester, actually talking to the president and saying that this thing is going to ruin your election chances. Do you call that like bravery to speak out? Because there have been instances where people who've spoken out like that, or where there's been opposition, it's really been hammered down on. So what do you call that?
I think every single member of parliament, to me, is just trying to figure out a way to get re-elected. I don't trust them to be like, oh, I'm human and I care about you. That is not the basis of most of their politics. We've seen it time and time again how flip-floppy they are with a lot of issues. But at its core, you also have to stand up for what's right. So maybe he's using this opportunity to put himself on a pedestal for the next wave of elections, but at the same time, I would like to say right now, like, Kenyans have been at the forefront of fighting back. They've spoken out. Like online, there's so many people sharing stories daily about like, oh, my mom went to get cancer treatment and it only paid 9,000. What is 9,000 going to do if your whole bill is at 58,000, 100,000, 500,000? It's so scary to know that kids are dying. Like was it a week-old baby who like died, and the health PS, if I'm not wrong, was, I am so sorry, this is a tragic thing that happens. Like, I understand MPs have to stand up and like defend their constituents somewhat, but at the same time, it shouldn't get to these levels of extreme for them to be taking these kinds of position. And it also shouldn't always be about elections.
Like stand for something.
Stand for something.
Stand for something.
Exactly.
And that for me is the issue. Like you don't seem to want to stand for something, even when it's inconvenient for your political position, for your constituents. I'd very much rather someone that comes out and says, even if they're wrong, I stand for this. So you elect me or you throw me out on this basis. But you can't always be flip-flopping and that sort of thing and then turning around like you're a stranger in Jerusalem thinking, what have Kenyans been saying all of this time? Again, for me, it's a listening problem. It's a serious listening problem. Sorry, you were saying something.
It is a listening problem, but also I think I just wanted to say, for all the MPs out there, stand for something, even if it's just on one leg or one toe. Like, do something that roots you into the people's, the people you represent, because you don't always have to be our friends. We are not your friends. You're public servants. But at the same time, don't put yourself in a position where people have to beg for their lives for you to be like, okay, maybe this is wrong.
And one might say, like, the stand that they're making by not standing with the Kenyans is actually a stand. That
is a stand. Silence is also a stand.
It's also a stand. Anyway, we move forward. So the past couple of weeks have been, filled with a flurry of activity. One of our guests on the show, Martha Karua, going to Amunyoro to visit Rigathi Gachagua. Hey, by the way, Rigathi, when that guy gets on a mic, my gosh, 7 days of work destroying his reputation, countered in one speech. I was like, God damn, like that guy went in on the president. Anyway, ni kama kuna kitu
I have so much to say because I don't trust that he's doing this out of the goodness of his heart. Again,
of course
he's
not.
a politician.
But you see, it's for the political sport. Like, you know, if you suspend reality and watch politics as a sport.
Yes.
Right?
He's
Wamunyoro FC versus the KK Wanderers or something like that. And the kind of like banter that's there, it's entertainment, I guess. So at that level, man.
I'll say what he's doing right now, I think what the government did with him, like trying to get him away from the core of the government and disposing of him, is really hurting them. Because he could really win as a podcaster. Like that's something he would knock it out of the park.
Can you imagine the Wamunyoro podcast? Welcome today to the Truthful Man's podcast.
The thing I see
straight from Wamunyoro.
The thing I see it as is the way the Dallas Mavericks got rid of Luka Doncic.
Yes.
Like they just traded him like in the middle of the night because apparently he's like gaining weight or something.
Which is very stupid.
Yes.
Because what they've just handed the Lakers is another maybe 5 or 6 years of dominance.
Yes.
As LeBron exits, then now they build a dynasty around Luka. Yeah, but anyway, back to Kenya. Those meetings, right? So you have Karua, and you remember the justification that you weren't on the show.
I was not on the show. I did watch it.
So what she said essentially was that, Rigathi has hurt me politically, and he said things that have been offensive to me, but right now the focus is on getting rid of Ruto. And if you hear, Wamalwa, Kalonzo, Matiang'i, Uhuru, all of that, the focus is the same. Now, on one level, it sounds like, yes, they are focused. But for me, the dog whistle there was that these are now tribal alliances that they're trying to form. And I don't know who we should credit this to. But certainly William Ruto plays a big part, and you can nini me if I'm wrong, that in the 2022 election, the hustler narrative, whether for selfish purposes or for other purposes, actually started to move people's attention away from who they are and where they actually live and their ethnicities, right?
Yes.
But then there's now the practical aspects of winning an election in this country. So I guess what I'm stuck on is there's the ideal that we're looking for in this country where I don't care where Justine comes from. If Justine's shady, then she's shady. If Justine is good, then she's good, and we elect them on that basis. But then people come from somewhere, and there's this history that we have in this country of voting along tribal lines.
Yes.
I don't know, when you saw these kinds of meetings, what are your thoughts?
Okay, so there's a lot of problematic discourse around how tribalism is framed, especially with new alliances. Because first of all, I would just like to be the one to say that I don't trust any of these people. Whether they're like, oh, we care about you. These are old politicians.
But
they've been
care.
in every single party. They've been... No, like you cannot think of them like that. Old people are dangerous. Some of them are like not even awake. Like we can't trust them. So in my head, like whenever I see these alliances, and yes, tribalism is at the core of most of them because historically, people have been disenfranchised along these tribal lines. So to protect themselves, they've taken stances within their community to shield themselves from more harm. It happened, and the tribal lines don't usually just affect people outside of a tribe. Like sometimes it's within the tribe. Like people place enemies within your tribe to fight you off and kill you off. It happened, I think, with the Mungiki sect, and Kirinyaga people have been very clear. We do not want these people around, and it's very scary to know that someone from your own community can actually be used against you. And then now there's like the whole tribal discourse where around the country, everyone is like trying to find the person to align with so that when they win, they get a chance to be at the table.
Yes.
And I don't think this is like a conversation we should be having in 2025.
But that's exactly the point, right? So that we should have this discussion, that we should have this conversation and lay it bare and say, Wamalwa, Kalonzo, etc.
Yes.
Why is it that these are the only people that you seem to want to be able to ally yourself to?
Yes.
What are their ideals? Like, what are their ideas? And yes, people will come and say that, you know, which Kenyan president has ever been voted for on the basis of ideals or ideas, etc. But we have to start somewhere. And,
Yes.
and then this is now the issue with, I don't want to call it, you know, the Gen Z movement writ large, but this new groundswell of opposition to William Ruto and everybody that represents this government, right? How are you going to organize yourselves in the face of two challenges? Because I think tribalism, you know, pops up in two ways.
Yes.
Number one, in these tribal things that they're
Ethnic
trying to
groups.
kind of force us back into having these kinds of alliances. And number two, even constitutionally, to
Yes.
be able to win the presidency, you need 25% in 21 counties.
Yes.
Meaning that you must have alliances.
In
or
those places.
Or at the, but then, what if we didn't think of it as alliances, but real support on the basis of like an idea? So what's that galvanizing idea, do you think, that Kenyans can rally around? That's a heavy question to ask you, but you know, but we all need to think about
why
this.
would you ask a comedian such a hard question? That's crazy.
Kwani comedians hawana kura? Yeah.
Tuko na kura, okay.
Yeah.
But okay, so what I would think about forming the alliances, the alliances should be based on like the experiences across those communities, across those people. And I think what the former deputy president is doing is probably is what's working. Like, you talk to people in a language they understand. Someone is messing with your money.
Yeah.
I'm going to figure out how to fix this problem. He is not to be trusted, but that's the language that you should use, because the constitution has been desecrated a lot, but a lot of people really struggle to understand how their rights sometimes are tied within the constitution and how that shows up in policy.
Yeah.
So when you're talking the language of the masses, you kind of have to figure out what's a thing that every single community can agree on, and how can you be in alliance with these communities along the lines of the things that they cannot really control because of the government that's in place, but can be shifted immediately when you get the people who want to work for them.
But that's the thing. What's that unifying thing, that theme that people can, you know, sort of talk about? Thomas, hey, Tom, hey, you're watching from Nini. Thomas said that self-preservation and selfishness is baked into all politics, but Kenyan politicians take it to a whole new level. Yes, true. Politics is a selfish sport, if I can call it that, by nature.
Yes.
But I am really waiting for that unifying conversation to really take root.
Yes.
And across demographics and across tribal lines and tribal divides, because there is no, the sad thing about this is that right now there is no counter-narrative or a narrative that transcends what the Wamalwas and the Kalonzos, etc. are doing. And my fear is that we then now go into 2027 with the same sort of conversation having been had. Oh, Waluya, kujeni msimame na Kalonzo, ama Wakamba kuja msimame na Matiang'i, etc. And then we don't look closely enough at who those people are.
Can I just say, like, the whole tendeni to smame, can we sit down? We're tired. Like, but also, one of the things that strikes me again and again is when people stand up to speak out about certain issues.
Yes.
We kind of do need a plan that goes beyond, I will change this. Because that's what people are afraid of. Because like the hustler person just showed up one day and convinced so many people that he convinced people on the basis of issues. And so many people bought into that, and they just like sidelined his history, and it's like, oh, if we don't do this, maybe we will not be protected in the next government. It didn't even take 2 years before we started seeing rifts. But if we were to change that narrative, you kind of have to acknowledge the historical injustices that have been committed against those communities. They should not be brushed away or like made to look like, oh, it wasn't that serious. I think that's where we're losing the plot, because a lot of people are either voting on basis of fear or on a basis of retaliation, or like waiting just to get that power so they can like misuse it. So I think handling the injustices as part of the community building, and also recognizing that there's economic disenfranchisement, and like what do you plan to do, like an actionable plan that's not just big statements.
Justine, we've got 2 years, right?
Yes.
We've got 2 years. Like the kind of trauma that you'd have to handle in every community would take you that 2 years. And there's a focus here that there's an election that's coming, and like seriously, even the trauma just in this room. Ukimuuliza Clint, by the way.
Are you guys okay? Do you need a therapist?
But and that's something that I hear a lot of people my age and older sort of like talking at and using as like a stick to beat back younger people with, that you're not focused, you're not saying this, there's 2 years left. And it's an unfair weight to carry, but it honestly should be something that young people consider going forward, because if you're going to go up against the colossus of the political machinery, both in the opposition and in government, there has to be something really powerful about what it is that you're saying to supplant that kind of machinery, right? And I'm still searching for where those conversations are happening, and not just happening in, you know, with Morara Kebaso, or whether you like him or not, Casmuel, Makaure, or whoever the new flavor of the month is, like in a place where people can recognize, okay, it might not be that we're rallying behind a person, but there are these unifying sets of ideals that we're going to take to this conversation, and we'll make sure that it is not one that is happening at the behest of these politicians, or where we have to bargain for a place at these tables.
Yes.
Build your own table.
Yes. Are we ready to build our own tables?
That's the best question.
Because a lot of people I have conversations with are very optimistic. They're like, we've moved a giant step from where we were a couple of years back.
True.
And where we're supposed to be so far, but we're headed in the right direction. But also, I'm not sure how people are building communities outside of like the things that they hate. We have to find the things that we love. We have to find values beyond we hate corrupt politicians. Like what do we want to see? What
Kenya do you want to see in the future? Like, what's the Kenya that you imagine for yourself?
Yes.
And that exercise of imagining the future, that's so astute, Justine. Hapo aye makofi.
Hey,
for real though. Like, because we don't do that exercise. You know, we don't engage in that exercise often enough of imagining what can Kenya be like. What are these values that I represent? What kind of society do I want my kids to live in? And even if I don't want kids, like what society do I want to die in?
Yes.
You know, like where
you die is actually
very important. Yeah. It's very important.
You don't want someone to dig up your grave to build a skyscraper. It happens.
Oh my gosh! Speaking of building on the pain of people, we have quite a number of state lodges and state houses that have been remodeled, including the big one here. Now, I want to ask a different question. So we're talking about the money, but has anyone really thought about what state house the building actually is or was in Kenya's history? Right? That was the governor's.
Can you repeat what you just said?
Like what state house is or was in Kenya's history, right? And that colonially was the governor's mansion.
Yes.
Like within weeks of Jomo Kenyatta taking power, him and the former governor just exchanged places at the same desk, right? And
he just moved into
exactly
a colonial room.
Now, it's not to say that we should have built him something for him to move into, but when you think about State House and what it represents at that level, just as a vestige of colonial past that many of us are very hurt by, do you rip down that State House and build a new one more in your image and likeness, kind of like what the Ghanaians have done in, you know, like theirs is, like, it's superb. Like, no matter what it costs, I'm like, man, that thing looks dope. It does.
Ghanaian, shout out to you guys. That's crazy, yeah.
Or do you keep it and take like the German model of remembrance in terms of history and saying, these are monuments and they might be monuments of shame, but they are monuments nonetheless and people need to learn. Or do you do what we've done and just soup it up, paint it, extend it kidogo, weka tirisha hapa, weka mlango hapa, alafu fanya hivyo now around the country? Like, what do you do before you even get to the tunes?
I was like, Kenya is just one huge tender. Like, people are just fighting for like the space where they get to sign their name and cash in. So that's why there's no conversation like this where what do we do with these particular places? I thought when Mzee Jomo moved, Johnston, sorry.
Yes.
When Johnston moved into that big house, I thought he at least sprayed, you know, like insecticide and like brought some people to cleanse it up.
He didn't like to sleep there. Yes. He liked to sleep in a shaweri.
That is so real. Because like, can you imagine, like you just start hearing like the voices of your colonizers when you're asleep. That's crazy. That he even was in there at some point. But I don't know what model would work, like whether it's renovation or like just let it stay there. But the way I said, like it's prime real estate, because like where it's located, it's like centrally located for a reason. It's about protection, it's about power, it's about wielding some kind of I don't know, it's like a juxtaposition of sorts between the poors and the powers that be. And
literally on a hill.
Yes.
Look, I tend towards this argument that all of our history is important, even the parts of the history that we don't like, we don't agree with, and are painful for us, because, you know, in every historical incident, there's a lesson. And I think one of the most beautiful examples of that is actually in Johannesburg, right? So a lot of people like to go to the Apartheid Museum. But one of the more powerful museums that I visited, and anybody who goes to Johannesburg, visa ni free, go to Constitution Hill. Because,
Constitution Hill.
Yes, because that's where the Constitutional Court in South Africa is built, and obviously built post-apartheid. But it's built on the same grounds that a prison was, you know, one of the worst apartheid prisons was built. And if they take you through what used to happen there, like literally the ditch where prisoners used to take a dump in every morning was upstream from where they would eat, right? And the kind of meals that would be served to Africans would be, you know, smaller than ones served to Asians, and the way the water was rationed was very specific, showing that apartheid was a systemic way to break the African, right? In the same way, what are these places in Kenya that have that sort of significance in terms of the states that, and not the states, but the systemic thinking of what a government wanted to do with its people that we then can like really look at and reflect on. And so the second part of the Constitution Hill story is that the Constitutional Court is then built, and it's this beautiful sort of ode to where South Africa should be moving, you know, to this rainbow nation where the judges all sit, you know, at eye level with the people in the audience. All of the 11 official languages of South Africa are, you know, are used in the court. And that kind of exercise. But us guys are stuck at chums.
I think it's not even that on, like, Kenya's history is just so, like, it's almost like in the dark. Like, a lot of us do not know a complete history of what this country was. We don't know any history about how our country continued on after colonization. Because every single story is just like a tragedy whether it came from progress or like a shifting of ideas, it was always just met with tragedy, and all these stories were just bottled up and like shelved. It's like we don't know what this country is in its fullness, in its failure, in its successes. We actually have no idea. And that part really influences how Kenyans see themselves and how they want to either protect or tear down monuments.
And this is why I think this past year and going forward is such an important time for Kenya, because this is a moment of rediscovery. I keep saying this, and maybe I'm wrong, but it's really my contention that what happened in June was Kenya's fight to reclaim a part of itself, a part of its soul that had been dirtied, it had been driven through the mud, and we've been made to believe that we are always going to be this tribal society that has tribal chieftains that, yes, will gather us all and put us in lines to vote for them, but that they will continue to steal. And what we should do is really just wait for the more evolved thief to then take power. That was a moment of reimagining of what our country could look like. And whether you are a politician who was, clutching their pearls at that moment, or a person who was on the streets, or even a person who disagreed with it, what I'd hope that people could come to the recognition of is that we really are not the Kenya of yesterday. And we need to take hold of what is happening. And whereas the State House thing is a small part of this conversation, it's really a part for us to engage with. What's the value of a State House if the people that the state is supposed to, rule on behalf of, do not feel represented, do not feel that even the remodeling, the renovation of a State House is a priority? Because that should be a monument that we are proud of as Kenyans. That's our State House. That's where our president sits. Yes, it needs a new coat of paint. Yes, it needs new curtains.
It does need.
That's more of a fashion
a place
statement.
For tea. Every single part is
right?
important. Yeah.
But it's one that we should look up to and take pride in and be like, okay, you know what? This actually needs to happen. But because we don't trust our politics, our politicians anymore, even that, becomes something that we need to now take a second, pair of eyes and take a look at. I feel some type of way about what's happening. And speaking of the value for money conversation, you guys should all read Tom's article, Kenya One in the Sky. If I can ask Mike to put it in the comments on X, in a thread, as well as on YouTube, just to think about the value for money conversation that we're having, not just at the fiscal level, but there's also a value for values conversation, I guess, that we should have. And speaking of values, can we now pivot to something completely different?
Oh my God.
There's a gentleman called Kairo.
Hey, same values.
Where? That young man is going through it right now.
Yeah.
He is going through it, and at some level I sympathize with him, because to be friendless in a time when your name is being dragged through the mud, when you're facing court and you're essentially facing the closure of your business and the death of your dream, can't be easy for anyone. I wouldn't wish it on my own enemies.
I would wish it on my enemies.
Bitterness, surely. Kunywa maji. Ama tukulete nini maziwa, surely.
No, I'm like, why are my enemies not? They're supposed to be suffering.
Transcend.
No,
yoga
never.
Classes, nini.
Never.
So let's be better
Never.
in 2025.
I will round this up. Why you cannot transcend your enemies in a few. Yeah.
Anyway, I look at Kairo and I think about the folly of youth, and the folly of trusting that money is a solution for everything, and the flaunting of wealth is a solution to what we were just talking about, the real values conversation. Like Barack was sharing with me one of the tweets that he wrote to Dennis Ombachi, and I was like, man, like this guy really thinks that he's the one who is, his own who's on top. Because he was really denigrating Dennis for ati, now my child has a trust fund, sijui in the Caymans, you just teach your son to cook.
Yes.
Like really, really, like incredibly just bad manners. And that the lesson that he's being taught now is one where Kenyans are engaging in sort of like Schadenfreude, you know, it's Schadenfreude,
Yes.
rather than like sitting back and reflecting on the lesson. And the lesson here is like sometimes values are more important than money, because values are what will save you when you're in a bad situation,
Yes.
being a good person in a bad situation. But you know, here I am pontificating on, you know, on Khalif.
You should pontificate more. I think sometimes you need to hear it from, because I don't know how to put this in kind words.
Yeah.
But I feel like Kairo's whole situation kind of is a mirror to how Kenyans view themselves. We don't have a lot of values outside of money and wealth, and like that's how we see ourselves. Like success is just how much money you have,
and everything is transactional.
Yes, and how you can use that to continue on, and like people are just supposed to blindly support you because you kind of have that kind of power. What breaks the whole thing for me is how many people were rallying to like send him money. And I'm like, do you understand in this moment in time when we speak about like politicians conning you or like whatever it is that goes on in that front, this is like an example with someone who does not even have any kind of power over your life really, but you feel like you owe them something. So we need to figure out a way as Kenyans, again, to develop a value system that's able to hold people accountable. Even if you're rooting for him, that's not a bad thing to do. But at the same time, you have to question, what are you rooting for? Are you rooting for him because you want to see the car business back up and running and him succeeding again and talking down at people? Or do you want him to succeed so that it's not just another guy that made a mistake and that's where his life ended?
Exactly.
So if you're not having that kind of conversation with yourself, where there's a friend of mine, shout out to Tainga Shira, who wrote, it's like suicidal empathy. Like everyone is just like, we should rally and support and do everything to make sure that he doesn't disappear. But sometimes that drop, that whole thing being taken away from you
is a lesson.
Is a lesson. And maybe if you learn the right lesson, you actually could come back better.
That would be my hope for this whole situation, because let me speak to this as a person who didn't have many friends who were my age who I could look up to. I know that Kairo represented something for young men across this country. Like, you can be young, you can be successful, you can make it in an industry that is supposed to be for the wababas, who then now go and wash these cars and listen to Lingala on Sundays, right? Like, and it can be cool, but to, you know, at what cost? I don't speak too much about the allegations because they're before court and we don't want to run afoul of the courts. But there certainly is that conversation about, you know, corruption and ill-gotten wealth that has been stirred by this. And we need new examples or new exemplars rather, of what success as a Kenyan looks like. And you're so right to point at how, in a way, Kairo's predicament is representative of the predicament in which we all are, in that the values that we've held up for ourselves as the Mecca or the true north are really crumbling before our eyes, and we have to find something that holds faster than driving a Lamborghini and insulting people that I don't know about farting and what. I was just looking at some of the tweets. I'm like, my gosh.
It's so crazy. I think one of the ones, the one that I saw, that was one of his best works. He said, I'm going to give a car to whoever's going to like write a poem to his girlfriend at the time. And I just saw people tap into their creativity in a way that I'd never seen. And I was just like so proud. If I was like an English teacher, I would be like, this is the best lesson we've had yet.
Oh my
but
gosh.
Considering the situation around it, it's like you're dangling a car. But in it is like a humiliation of sorts, a humiliation ritual for everyone who looks up to you to participate. That made me feel so sad for who people look up to and what people want from life. And I understand, like, a lot of us are in very desperate situations and we want to feel like someone is winning and we can feel like we're winning with them too.
True.
But at the same time, again, like, what are we doing? Do you really want to relive this moment a few years from now? And I'm like, yeah, I posted a poem to get a car. And the poem was not even about someone that I cared about. It was like someone else's girlfriend. Like, what are we doing here? It was a little crazy.
No, it's so interesting how every topic is kind of like driving us back to this question of values. This is a far deeper conversation than I expected to have. Not to say that we don't have deep conversations, but it's I like where this is going. And let's now move from someone who is involved in high drama to someone who has a very high-pitched voice. And
I'm gonna do impression. I'm growing as a person. You know, I'm more
I was baiting
respectful.
you. I was like, damn, man, like,
no.
bait.
No, I'm like,
all right,
trying
someone of high political stature. Let's draw it at that.
Yeah.
Yes, no matter the decibels in the voice.
Yes.
Look, Kindiki Kithure has been going from soapbox to political rally, talking about things from Gucci to someing the governor. Why are you laughing? Kwani we can't rock Gucci here.
Shout out to Gucci. What? No, I'm not saying anything. You finish.
No, nishamaliza. I'm like, okay. But I guess the conversation I was hoping that we can have is about, because the Gucci thing, on the one hand, you're like, okay, that's a good thing to the extent that you're bringing some sort of opportunity here at that level, and there should be some economic outcomes that are good for the country, and you give the devil his due to that extent. What I had a bigger problem with is the tone and the posturing, right? Like, we're bringing these things for you guys, you don't even care. Yeah? Sisi ndio serikali tutakuambia. And that carried over to the comments that he made to Cecily Mbarire. You are the national chairperson of UDA. How can you sit there while your president is being harassed and heckled? As if Cecily Mbarire had any control over what people were going to say, and it was in reaction to the very first thing that we discussed on the show, SHA. The moment President Ruto spoke about SHA, people were up in arms. Now, to blame a person on that basis, again, just speaks to being tone deaf, Yeah? Interesting choice of words given the tone of the conversation in which it was pitched.
I would like to apologize to all the dogs that have ever had to be in the vicinity of that sound. Secondly, one of the things that really... let me reach home. Look, having a high-pitched voice is not for the weak.
But it's also not a crime. Right?
Is it not though?
No, like
I can't listen to Mick Mill because they have the same kind of tone of voice. I don't understand how.
But nobody has ever darted you in like a high-pitched voice. Like, Justin,
when
so
I,
nice.
Look,
see, it hits different.
It hits different. Look, someone amenikatia na sauti yake ilikuwa juu ya yangu. And I had to just like take a sit back and decide in this moment in time.
Yes.
What will the yelling look like? And I think it was a great opportunity to say no.
Let's cut the show.
No, let me finish my point about like
whoever that guy is.
Shout out to
please let us
lower your voice.
Okay. Can we get back on track?
Yes, let me finish the thing I was going to say. Okay, I think as someone in that kind of position, I am a comedian. There's times when I've said things and people don't agree with it, and you get booed. You feel some type of way. The worst thing is silence. At least you're getting a reaction. People are actually angry and they're expressing that anger, and you shouldn't take it personally. You're a public servant. That's your job. People are not, like, you're not owed respect in that way, especially when it comes to a policy that's directly harming them.
Or blind loyalty to the extent that you would
Yes.
blame someone for the reactions of hundreds of people. I think that was,
Exactly.
yeah, it was very low bar by
Exactly.
someone of his higher learning, you know.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
And for considering how much he is in the public sphere, like the position that he holds, like he should continually understand that he whatever he says is impactful.
Yep.
So if people start getting harmed because they booed a president, or like they didn't agree, or like they didn't fall in line, it just means that in a way he doesn't want to work. He wants acceptance. And please, if this is like an acceptance issue, you will have to go to therapy and figure out that part of your soul that needs that kind of approval.
Yeah.
Because all of us are struggling with something, but it can't be on us to hold you up. If we don't agree, we don't agree. And
True.
you should check back at what you're trying to
And there's ways
push.
to raise grievance, right? Even in the public space that then doesn't leave people feeling some type of way. But then again, let's take the devil's, let me play devil's advocate here. On the one hand, for 2 years, you've been working on this agenda, and nobody seems to appreciate that there actually is an agenda that you're working on. If he's to be believed, that the fundamentals that President Ruto's government is working on are going to become apparent in the next 6 to 8 months, right? To use a well-worn phrase, right? So wacha kucheka wewe.
Nimeacha, I promise. No more laughing.
Okay, but like on that, on that basis alone, that there should be some sort of empathy for where he's coming from. He feels aggrieved that the work that is being put in is not being appreciated. But is it up to us to appreciate? But if someone does something good for you, shouldn't you be like, yeah, actually, thank you?
First of all, no. Secondly, how do we weigh the good and what's enough?
Gucci,
Look,
bad, Embu governor.
I'll say,
Gucci bag, Embu
Okay.
commentary. Then now you way over there. hapo
okay, so
katikati.
if you're bringing jobs, if you're bringing Gucci jobs or Louis Vuitton jobs or like whatever job, because like a lot of companies from outside actually have
Yeah.
factories here and they've worked here for a long time because of the low cost of labor, which is a completely different conversation, but those companies exist. So if you're going to bring jobs for people,
Yeah.
and they're quality jobs and they're good jobs, you should just bring the jobs. Don't expect people to line up to be like mheshimiwa asante, because like not the entire Kenya is going to work there. It's probably going to be like maximum 300 people or like 1,000 people at best. So if you think about the metrics of the jobs that are being brought,
Yeah.
it's probably just like a drop in the ocean, but it's still something. And if people don't believe you, it's because you have continually said again and again and again, you're going to do this, we're going to do this, and then it doesn't end up happening.
Yeah.
So him telling us about Gucci jobs, everyone knows that's a fake bag. All of us are like, we do not trust it until we see it.
Damn, mad Justine, the bars that you're dropping today anyway.
No, I was just like, that's the concern for a lot of Kenyans.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So I think that's where it stems from. They have bred a culture of mistrust with us because they kept breaking promises. And Kenyans are just like, no, we're going to just ask Gucci directly. We're going to ask you directly where those jobs are.
True.
Who is in charge. We need some fact sheet or something before we're just like, okay, this is an actually accomplished promise.
This is a great sort of living example of when you use the wrong means to be able to gain power, those things then tend to come back. And one of the things that people are angriest about is dishonesty, is the fact that we can't trust what is coming out of our government. And that's a very sad place to be as a country. You want to talk up your country. You want to go out there and really talk about the things that are happening in Kenya. And you'll hear a lot of our neighbors be like, yeah, but you guys have got so much going on. But this is what they tend to harp on. And for me, the analogy is that of, the one-eyed man in the kingdom of the blind, right? You can't then stand up and say, because I am the one-eyed man here, then I have the vision for everybody. You still are leading a kingdom where people need more than that. They need true vision and they need true delivery. Yeah. Speaking of
the analogy,
man, I'm telling you, man. But speaking of delivery, let's move on to what's happening in our Nairobi, or what happened last week. We were delivered into the hands of floods and of almost biblical proportions.
Yes.
And Johnson Sakaja delivered to us, something that a lot of people were kind of upset about, the question about the capacity of our drainage to bear the floods that, that will periodically hit us. And the question is, like, where have you been living? What was Nairobi before it became Nairobi? And isn't this then a question of urban planning that you should be in charge of? I recall last year, there were concerns about 700 apartment units that had been built without the express approval of the people in the buildings. I forget the term for the department that handles the licensing, right? And that this was brought to the attention of the county government. Obviously, if you're going to build 700 apartments in a space that had or housed maybe 100 people, there's going to be a problem, especially if you live in a place that was a swamp before. And so I wondered what Sakaja was driving at when he was telling us that we have no capacity.
I think that's probably the most honest thing he's said.
Ooh, okay.
Because this is just like, it's Noah abandoning all those people to get onto the ark. Because a lot of Nairobi politicians do not live in the places where most people are affected.
True.
I am a pedestrian. I have almost been carried away by floods. I've almost moved to a whole different county because of how much water.
If I pour this, you can be carried away by it. That's not saying a lot. You should have said, John Allen, you seem like a very heavy-set person, and last week would have been a very difficult time in your life. You as the SI unit up or no?
That is true, but also like smaller people also need protection. Like we can't all just like have to have like some kind of mass weight to hold us down. We don't have the capacity from like how we are built.
Yeah.
But at the same time, my thinking is like him saying they don't have the capacity to build for Nairobi is actually truthful, because this city as it was designed was not designed for this many people. They have not thought of ideas outside of what was left there, and every single person who's represented this city in some way or form has been some kind of pillager. Like they come, they take, they build what they want to build, they add apartments and add all this different infrastructure, but they never fix the thing that's supposed to be fixed in the first place.
Yeah.
And then we're not even talking about like the riparian land issue. We're not talking about smaller communities where there's like a population density where so many people are living off of very little resources. And then there are people who, it's an apartment of like 100 people and they have way more resources because of how the city is served and the privatization of services. So, Sakaja, Johnstone, just like the first president, if you're listening, like you need to figure out with the metropolis that is Nairobi, how to build out, how to make sure that the city works in terms of not just the infrastructure that's like the drainage and like the roads, but also what is transportation? What does that look like? And when you think about transportation, you have to think of the littlest person. You have to think of the pedestrian. You have to think of me. Sorry, this is very selfish. You have to think of me. I walk all the time. So if there's a place where I know I can't go because the drainages are bad, or like I'm sharing a sidewalk with a boda guy and an Uber driver who's late, like I am not going to get anywhere. I might be in an accident, I might get harmed. So if they're building out, they have to think about like, what does that transportation look like? What does the metropolis that is Nairobi, how can it serve the smallest person? Because if it works for the pedestrian, 100% it will work for everyone else.
Well, I agree to the extent that yes, he should be thinking about this and their legacy issues. But you see, every governor can't come in on the same stoop and say that, yeah, I'm fixing the problems of the past and let me handle, and we don't have capacity. For me, it's giving scarcity mentality, right? It's giving this mentality where the problems that confront you cannot be resolved. When you have a brains trust of perhaps some of the most brilliant people in Kenya around you, both in the private sector and in the public sector, to add to that, you have actual departments who are dedicated to the task of doing this and have been dedicated for years. And there actually also are plans in terms of, for instance, a road network. What areas are supposed to be zoned as high density areas, as low density areas. And it boils down to the question of corruption, right? Are you able to, yes, admit to the capacity problem, but to fix the corruption issue in that we don't make the situation worse? And then now start to, as you said, start to build out. Or if we're building up and we're choosing that direction.
Please don't build up.
Well, I'm just
Nairobi
saying.
Nairobi is a Tower of Babylon situation. We're not gonna. Is it Tower of Babel situation? Yes. We're not gonna make it. Yeah.
Tower of Babel and Streets of Babylon is what I've been told.
Yeah, it is.
But like whatever direction that we choose, do it with the conviction that, as you said, that there are people that the singular unit of Nairobi is the person who needs to be able to get around. And how do they get around? How do they live? Corruption versus the question of dignity. Going back to the conversation about what? Values. Yeah. Right?
Sasa wamesema una values.
Mi sijasema hivyo. Sijasema hivyo. Yeah. Kenyans value you and your dimple. Dimples.
Oh no, the dimple couldn't even take away the flat.
But I mean, I jest. The truth of the matter is that I can appreciate when a man has a very difficult task, across his desk.
I agree.
For me, the issue is don't complain about it when you have all of these resources that can help you resolve the problem. It's like being, to borrow the Bob Marley line, in the abundance of water, the fool is thirsty. Use the brain's trust. Talk to the people, consult with the people. How should we help? And then also consult with the people who have the ability to help you plan your way out of this, right? Consult with us. We're here to do that. And maybe that might be a trust-building exercise that can, A, get you re-elected, but B, deliver a Nairobi that we all deserve. But it is a difficult place to be. Not as difficult as the next person that we're going to speak about, and we're kind of running low on time. But I think we ought to talk about this guy. This guy is called Wicknell Chivhayo, right?
Well, the Zimbabwean
guy,
yes.
Heavy-set guy, right? And I first learned about him in Zimbabwe last year. I was there for about a week doing some work on training of journalists. And I think that was about the first time that Wicknell had gone to meet William Ruto. And then I see a picture with President Samia Suluhu. And then I see a picture with other elites. But then you read into his past, and it's checkered, to say the least, right? I think even Dechivela had done some sort of explainer about who he is.
What did he do?
Car theft. The allegation is that he was part of like a car theft ring and smuggling of allegedly. Yes. Okay. Allegedly smuggling of cars across the border. But how interesting is his ascendancy in Mnangagwa's government after the exposure of this Pastor Gabriel. Remember, not Pastor Angel. Pastor Angel, the guy from the gold mafia scam. Yes. So, you don't want to paint a scarlet letter on him just yet, but you really must ask some questions about the friends that our president and other presidents in the region choose to associate with, and what his actual role is. That for me is my concern about him. Once everything is put out in the air, then fine, you consort with who you want to consort.
Someone called Wicknell should worry all of us. I don't know. Jackie, it's too close to wicked for me. As in, I don't trust it. It's not.
Oh my gosh.
Because if he has a history in election fraud, I'll leave the car theft thing for now. I don't know if he stole like a car from State House, that would be really funny. But like someone who has been involved in election malpractice being in the vicinity of a person who no one is trusting at the moment is very, very alarming should be alarming to all of us. So yeah, Wicknell, just stay in Zimbabwe until after 2027.
Yeah, then now we figure ourselves out.
Yes.
Then and also, you know, let us know a little bit more about who you are. Let's move to some stuff that's happening internationally, and we'll stay on the continent first. There's I don't want to call him a gentleman. There's a man called Janusz Wallace, right? He's Polish, right-wing extremist, and very, very unpopular, and for very good reason. In 1993, in April, he assassinated one of the preeminent leaders in South Africa, Chris Hani. Chris Hani was the leader of the South Africa Communist Party. He was a very, very key figure in Umkhonto we Sizwe, the military wing of the ANC. And in the transition from apartheid to you know, a free South Africa, he was a very key figure. So when he was assassinated, it literally brought South Africa to the brink of civil war. And he was released on parole after 30 years, only for him to give an interview where he says, yeah, by the way, I don't regret any of my actions, yeah? And you know that French song, Rien non rien, or Je regrette rien, you know, non, rien, non, rien, that essentially was his...
I did not know those were the words. I was just like, I sing the tune. Yeah.
But, you know, for me, watching that interview, and I'm not even South Africa, it was incredibly painful, given the future, just in the murder of Chris Hani that was stolen from South Africans, and the possibility that even some of the questions that we're asking ourselves or are being asked today about expropriation of land, etc., might have been answered in part, would this person have survived? I feel for, you know, South Africa in that respect, and you'd hope that a person who spent 30 years in jail after doing something so heinous would rehabilitate himself. He still thinks that blacks ought to be separate. He still thinks that blacks are inferior. And, you know, he has a platform to say that in his home country, in this day and age, that I just find it beggars belief, to be honest, that person, you know, had the cojones to say that. But anyway, I'm sure you have thoughts.
I would say so many things, but I think the thing that troubles me is when people want to tell a story and like you have to tell all sides of the story, and like the platforming of very dangerous people emboldens people who would have questioned their actions. Like they feel like if that guy can get away with it, not truly get away with it, but if he can sit there after 30 years in prison and be like, okay, these people deserve this, he's, and like that interview being shared, it's encouraging more people like him. I don't think his sentiments are far from what is happening across the world. It's just that what are we doing to contribute to certain kinds of conversations? And I wish it was more written than having to see that person. Yeah.
I think, but here's where I disagree, Justine. I think it was painful to watch.
Yes.
And I cringed as I watched it. But a part of me was grateful to have known that there are people out there who are still unrepentant about these things. And this is part of that continuing history and that continuing struggle, that no matter how, you know, how heavy the punishments are, to use a phrase from Invictus, how the punishments may scroll, that there are people who still hold to this, you know, misguided belief and values that you and I are less than them. It's important because as an African, it gives you locus to understand possibly how other people function. And on that note, I want us to move to the fight that's happening between the US and South Africa over the Expropriation Act. You saw what Donald Trump said.
Yes.
And you saw who your bestie, what your bestie Elon Musk said as well.
Which bestie? Where?
Come on.
Please do not associate me with that apartheid
Justine
Clyde.
Hart's
Please,
Elon
no.
Musk.
People will start thinking I'm like a Musk bro. No.
Yeah, but when you saw the tweet from Truth Social, and then Elon Musk's direct, question to South Africans about, why are you instituting racist policies? What was your reaction?
First of all, who is even surprised that like a white South African is taking this stance? He has been questioned repeatedly about his father owning an emerald mine, and he's like, no, I came from a regular family. What regular family has an emerald mine? If I had an emerald mine, you would never see me. Like, why would I own Twitter? Yeah. But for him, it's a matter of power. Like, he has so much power. Like, Elon Musk holds so much power, not just like in capital, but also being that close to like one of the highest, most militarized nations in the world, and using that opportunity to put Black South Africans and like colored South Africans and all these different marginalized communities in harm's way. And I'm not saying all white South Africans are bad people, but like they own 70% of the land. Most of them don't even use the land, but like there's an entitlement of sorts for many of the ones who do. And if a person with that much power places almost, it's kind of like a gun directly at your president, saying, why are you allowing this to happen?
Let's actually listen to what Cyril Ramaphosa said. If we can cue that clip now and play it.
This issue that Donald Trump fears so much, we offer this question of the land. I don't know what Donald Trump has to do with South African land, because he's never been here. And he must keep his America, we will keep our South Africa. That's what he must do. South Africa is our land. South Africa belongs to all the people who live here in South Africa. It does not belong to Donald Trump. He can keep his America. And Ene is even worse. He's even worse. When I meet him, I will tell him. I will say, you, Donald Trump, you are even worse, because your forebears came to America. They found the indigenous Americans. They wiped them out. They killed nearly all of them. Rine, we are living as a nation, and black and white, we are going to find solutions for our land question. So Donald Trump must leave us alone. He must leave us alone, Kaori. When we were facing apartheid, when we were facing oppression, he was not here. He did not fight side by side with us. And we were able, on our own, yes, with support of progressive forces in the world, to resolve the apartheid question. As far as I recall, Donald Trump was not around the negotiating table when we negotiated the end of apartheid. So stick around there in the White House. We will do our business here, and we will find solutions for our problem. So stay out of our issues, and we will not get involved in your issues in America. You have your own problems. Leave us alone.
Cyril Ramaphosa's statement there, President Cyril Ramaphosa, I should say, hearkening back to those days of the same debate around land and expropriation between Robert Mugabe of Zimbabwe and Tony Blair of the UK. Almost same phrasing. You know, keep your England, we'll keep our Zimbabwe. The same thing, you know, you keep your US, we'll keep our South Africa. And that speaks very, very powerfully, I'm sure, to a lot of Africans who are wondering, like, but yeah, where do you get off telling us that this is a racist policy when you're not even commenting about the fact that A, it hasn't been implemented, B, the Expropriation Act, because I took some time to read it, talks about expropriation without compensation in very specific circumstances, right? Yeah. And there's a context around which expropriation can happen. Public infrastructure, for instance. So it happens in 2 or 3 contexts, right? So in the public's interest, and that's supposed to be a guided, not arbitrary, you know, way through which this happens, and for public projects, right? That you know, for instance, like public infrastructure, you wanted to build a railway, etc. And the expropriation of land is not a new tool in government, but obviously it's a far deeper discussion in a country like South Africa, where land was at the center of the struggle against apartheid, right? That there are Africans today who live on a point next to people who own 1,000 acres of land. If you transposed that to Laikipia here in Kenya, it's the same debate. 52 to 58% of Laikipia is in private hands by private ranchers who own hundreds of thousands of acres of land. Speaking of which, there was a really important ruling last week in Isiolo with regard to the communities and the ownership of some of those conservancies there, which I think will really, really set a precedent for how community land is managed. But I mean, back to South Africa, for me, Cyril Ramaphosa's, you know, talking about this so passionately, I think really is you don't want to pick a fight with a president as powerful as Trump, but there have to be some baseline, again, values that you must have, in that you won't allow yourself or your country to be denigrated in a way that Trump did in one, you know, what do you call, is it a tweet on Truth Social or a post? It's a right? Truth. It's a truth. Yeah,
apparently that's what they put.
Really?
Yeah, it's not very creative.
Yeah, man, I mean, there are a lot of things that are not creative about Trump, but yeah, I mean, that's enough of that. There's still a lot of things that are happening, and the impact of which we are feeling here, right? So on the US, you know, aid freeze, what's your point of view? Because there's a debate. Una maoni?
Ningesema sina maoni, lakini kusema tu kweli, like Trump is not just like a dangerous person, but he's laid bare just how much of like the global South infrastructure has been disenfranchised again and again and again to a point where like them turning off aid is literally killing people right now.
But isn't that a good thing, right? So that the laying bare that you can now see in clear terms just how much dependence there is on the United States.
I agree, because liberalism, neoliberalism, or like whatever it is called in the technical term, was like, we are all friends here. But the problem is like, you don't get to build your own infrastructure, I dictate the terms. The terms were foreign aid, the terms were, oh, we'll have USAID sitting in your IEBC. Like it's a thing that has happened. It's very messed up, but at the same time, people who have absolutely no control about where they are born, what situations they find themselves in, are entangled into this neoliberalism mess. So turning off aid is not necessarily a bad thing, but at the same time, it puts so many vulnerable people in a position where a lot of these countries, people pay debt that goes back to those countries. So the aid is not, oh, I love you and I'm giving you money.
Of course, it's a tool of soft power and influence, right? Yes. And you can see how that influence can be exerted, right? But here comes someone like Uhuru Kenyatta, and he asks in the same way, laying the question bare, like, this isn't our money, why should we be crying if...
This is where I disagree. When he says this isn't our money, it's not our money. But at the same time, this is like such a beautiful opportunity for like every African country to be like, we are not paying back any of the debt. You have to find a way to take all the money that's going outside to stay here so that people can actually benefit from their hard work and every social service that is supposed to serve them.
Yeah.
If you're going to turn off that aid tap, they should also
turn off the debt tap.
Yes,
right.
Because then it's an exchange, it's an extraction of sorts.
It's an unequal exchange.
Yes.
And here's where to some extent I agree with William Ruto, that the terms that Africans borrow on are completely separate, that we are looked at as more risky, that the terms of aid are more difficult, that we'll often pay more in terms of repayments, and that the aid will be managed by people who have to come here to then now tell us how to do things with our aid, right? On that level, and this is a difficulty that I have with Uhuru Kenyatta's statement, right? On that level, I agree completely. And this is speaking as a person whose organization has received grants to do some of the work that we do. I agree to the extent that we can't dictate, how these people treat their money. But at the same time, you, as a president, oversaw 10 years of power in which a big chunk of our own health budget was paid for by aid. What was the work that went into making these sources of revenue indigenous and prioritizing raising the amount of money that's dedicated to healthcare from, for instance, appropriations in aid, where you could look for resources from parastatals, etc. That accounts for about 13% of the monies that we raise, to be able to then now raise this question. So for me, there's that honesty in that, yes, it's true, and none of us likes to be dependent in that way. But it's also true that you had an opportunity and you didn't take it, and you can't then turn around and speak to us outside of this context.
Yes.
Same thing with William Ruto, by the way, which I find is super interesting.
Yeah.
A couple more things that I want to say about this thing as we wind up, right? This kind of, I want to call it, militant diplomacy using tariffs and aid freezes, etc. It's laying bare, global politics in a way that, in some ways, I struggle with, but in other ways I appreciate. In that now you can tell how, for instance, tariffs are used in a very strong and political manner. I wonder whether President William Ruto and the KK government or anybody in Africa is thinking about, on the one hand, there's this, conversation we're having about the people who are seated at the table now bargaining over tariffs, but how we take advantage. And one of the industries that I was thinking about was makodofia, right? Who doesn't love a good avocado, right? Yeah. and Americans eat millions of them, 1.4 million metric tons of avocados are exported by Mexico, 81% of which goes to the US, right? We do about 120,000 metric tons. If this tariff is applied against the states, then there's an opportunity. But there's also places in which we'll be losers, right? If our urban housing agenda requires steel, and the price of steel is then affected because of the tariff war between China and the US, then we will suffer. I wonder what our positioning is, when it comes to what's happening in the States, whether kama tuko na msimamo ama ni tu we just wait until the dust settles and we treat ourselves as the grass that is suffering when elephants are fighting. So
right now we are so much the grass. We are literally the grass right now because we've been caught flat-footed, but in this moment in time, this is why visionary leadership is important. You have to be in conversation with people who foresee or imagine a different way to transact, imagine a different way of bringing yourself to the table. What can you exchange in value? What can you make sure that's not taken away from you? Yeah. As it stands, Africans can barely trade with each other because the infrastructure is barely there. Our presidents are fighting about things here and there. There's still internal conflict. There's a lot that's not been resolved. And then you have outsiders who obviously have the infrastructure to take everything from you. Yeah. And that person they're scary. They have money, they have power, they have a military base in your country. They could literally do anything. So if you're going to negotiate your way into a good deal that's going to serve you, that's going to make you money, that's going to protect your citizens, it has to have some kind of vision that's not just like, oh, we'll give you this in exchange of this. It's like, no, this is what we want to be able to keep as a country, regardless. Like, it's non-negotiable.
Remember what and remember what Adam Smith said, you know, it's not for the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but for regard of their own interest. This is what I appreciate about Donald Trump's approach, because the self-interest of the United States and the interests of other countries will now have to be laid bare, and the people have an opportunity to really interrogate, like, who are the people who we have in charge of us? I think it'll do a lot to debunk a lot of the narratives around ethno-nationalism, even here in Kenya, or, you know, right-wing racist sort of like undertones in Europe, or even the kind of silencing of dissent in places like China or India. You know, it does a lot for just giving oxygen to real hard truths to be appreciated. But the balance obviously is between this oxygen that you're fueling and the fire that you're stoking by creating this hate-filled environment in which it's me first versus you. There's no collegiality when it comes to, you know, what's happening. And the tariff thing is a really important thing. So, I mean, to our audience, one of the things that I'd encourage people to do is to start to look at commodities indices like, you know, the steel price index, gold, etc., and where this is moving. Another thing to look at, obviously, in light of these kinds of trade wars, we've noticed the collapse of tech stocks over the past couple of weeks. You're looking at the collapse of Bitcoin prices. There's a lot that's happening right now that should inform your own worldview, or your own worldview should be informed by, in order for you to start making decisions. And these conversations that we're having here, it's part of it, right? Justine, we have two last things to do.
Yes.
One thing is for me to, you know, talk about our last topic of the day, which is a DRC. And the other is for you to tell us some jokes. And there's also some stuff about IEBC, you know, there's a correctional services policy draft. There's the question about Vivo Petrol. But on the DRC, Justine, last week was a difficult week for all of us to have watched what was going on. And this is, you remember the conversation we were having, you know, off camera about justice.
Kindly help, like, walk us through what the situation in the DRC is. Because I had asked you, because I was so confused. I felt like I was consuming misinformation because I didn't know what was truthful, or if I was consuming incomplete information. So I think you explained it really well.
So okay, so here's my point of view, having, you know, just watched it. Obviously, there'll be parts of this story that I won't, you know, get completely. But what's happening between the DRC and Rwanda is a very long tale of many things that even began with the colonial project of the DRC. Someone pointed to me that when the DRC was of interest to the world, it was because it was producing rubber and ivory at the time when vehicles, motorized vehicles, start becoming popular and therefore require rubber tires, right? And so the colonial project of King Leopold then just starts to predate on the DRC. And the DRC is so wealthy that years and years and years of predating on the DRC have not completed that. We are now in another cycle of a rush or a hunt for resources that are important for certain industrial revolutions, green transition, at the center of the AI war right now with chips and cobalt and coltan and these kinds of very important resources, a lot of which are found where? In the DRC, but more of which are found in Eastern DRC. Now, juxtapose onto that the fact that this colonial project imposed on Africa borders that were completely arbitrary, separating communities, the same way the Luhya of Uganda and the Luhya of Kenya sitting across borders, and they might be brother and sister or cousins in the case of like Wakina Mudiaori, but they have different nationalities. The same thing happened to Rwanda, in that the kingdom of Rwanda was divided. There were people in Burundi, in the DRC, in Tanzania, Uganda, and in Rwanda itself that then now become divided. The Banyamulenge in the DRC then now have this struggle to assert their identity as Congolese, which is fought by Mobutu. And at that same time, the conflicts that were brewing in Rwanda lead to the genocide. The genocidaires flee across the border. The RPF chases them. It's quite a bit of information about the atrocities that were committed by the RPF in Congo. But the overarching narrative is that this was happening more, as a consequence of revenge. Obviously, there are scholars and studies and academia that challenges that, but that's the overarching narrative, right? And so it makes it very difficult to comment about the DRC without really considering the very complex history that led to the genocide. Because the FDLR, who were perpetrators of the genocide, so they are essentially a militia that were fighting with and on behalf of the Juvenal Habyarimana government and massacred a lot of Tutsi. They would then also flee across the border and start to continually militarize and rebuild some of their resources. They're chased across the border. You have this conflict that's happening between Congo, Kinshasa, and the Banyamulenge, which then causes the growth of the M23, right? Of course, the M23 didn't just grow by itself. Look at the evidence that the UN has brought forward about, Rwanda's perceived role in supporting the M23. The M23 can be thought of as a militia that has both worked to protect the Banyamulenge and those who are called ethnic Rwandese, and who are fighting to be part of the national project that is Rwanda. But they are very well resourced, very well trained, very well armed, and constantly on the offensive in protecting positions that are advantageous to Rwanda, at least from some of the reports that have come out. And so at the bottom of this whole thing is this question of resources, right? And that contested history, this complicated conflict, the fact that we've had MONUSCO in the DRC for a long time, and many, many other issues, then now brings people to loggerheads. There's so many other, threads that I can pull on, but largely, if I look at it, it's a place where contested histories and incomplete truths are now at conflict with one another, and it becomes very difficult to unpick who is right and who is wrong, because both sides are accused of very heinous atrocities. And at the end of the day, the Congolese suffer, the Rwandese suffer, Africa suffers. There's some people who are getting rich, right? Yeah. So that's why, for me, I think it's really important for us to begin to unpick what's happening in Rwanda and in Congo, because it then now gives us some locus to start to question both Tshisekedi and Kagame on the basis of factual accounts. Whether the Angola process or the Nairobi-led process is going to, lead to that is difficult to say. It's difficult to say. So
that's
long,
that's
and
heavy.
It's heavy, and some parts of it, like you said, like I said earlier, it's tough to get through. But I mean, the Congolese story is such a long story. Before I let you close the show, a couple of comments here. Eric says, our history is often presented in benign and easily consumed formats. And this is in reference to the history conversation we're having on State House. Bomas of Kenya is a great example of how the entire idea of culture is packaged as entertainment, right? And there was Ivy Kihara was also talking about the values conversation. Elsie Wandera says she loves the values conversation. Thank you very much for watching, all of you who are watching. On X, Siraj says the day leaders will vie for development and not personal interests or power for influence. is when we'll become certain of change. For now, let's work on who we are installing next, because turning dirty water clean will not happen in the near future. I don't know whether that's realist or a pessimistic view, but it's his view, and we appreciate it. Justine, just take us home. Funga show.
Your conversation here, DRC, was very heavy.
Norma.
It was very informative. At least now I have more context. So when I speak about it, I'm not just like spouting stuff I saw on the internet. So I'm going to try and make this super light. The Grammys were yesterday, was it today morning? And it's, first of all, I'll say, shout out to King Kendrick. He won 5 out of 5 of all the Grammys he was nominated.
I knew we'd always start there.
Kendrick all day. Yeah. He won the beef. He's on like one of the best runs that we've seen for a hip hop artist. And like having all these celebrities in like a giant stadium just shouting A minor was really heartwarming.
Oh, with everyone in the crowd, eh?
Yes,
I was like, wow, that was crazy. That was a crazy
really
moment.
Crazy. Yeah. And my appreciation for the Grammys also brings us back home, where the president and like the former, I think, tourism minister, I've lost count of how many people have been changing offices. The last, I think it's the tourism minister. Not tourism. Which position did Murkomen hold?
Murkomen was in sports, then now he's gone to interior. Okay, before that, he was in transport, roads. Yes.
See, I don't even know who said this, but like I do remember hearing it from the person who is apparently in charge of this country right now, just saying that the Grammys will be held in the country. Oh,
no. You know who said it?
Yes.
It was Dennis Itumbi. And then he said that they were having conversations. Alafu, President Ruto saying, and in fact, really, where I was so happy I was going to see Kendrick in person. That would have been my second time. Like, can you imagine Kendrick at Bomas with me? That would have made my day, you know. And then I have to take a boda home, and then we fall into like Sakaja's drainages, you know, just like the complete Nairobi experience. That would have been fun. But so like the Grammys not coming to Nairobi is really hurting my feelings right now. Doechii won like for Rap Album of the Year. She's the 3rd woman to do this, and it's so awesome because I really, really love Alligator Bites Never Heal. Who Alligator
else won?
Bites Never Heal.
Yes, it's a really good mixtape.
Okay.
It's a really good mixtape. And I know everyone who was nominated in that category was really good, except J. Cole. You should have deleted that album. So, sorry, that's very personal. Thames won, and like Thames is such a darling. Thames won the Africa Performance Award, Grammy of the Year. Yeah. Beyonce won her first album of the year, which was like a moment. And I think what this speaks to, because I've seen a lot of Kenyan artists being like, I want to be there next year, and 100%, if it doesn't come to Bomas, you will be able to go to the Grammys yourself, I pray so. And also the Meru governor's husband, I'm forgetting his name, I think it's called
Murega Baichu.
Yes. He released a diss track for people who hate his wife. All the senators, he name-checked them in that diss track. And I've never been, like, Valentine's is coming, that's a real husband. You know, like, all of you should, like, take notes, because it takes a while to write a song and get everyone's name right. And I was hoping, you know, like, you would perform that song at the Grammys in Nairobi. So, I feel like that night was, like, haters. Again, remember when I told you should never transcend your enemies? This is that moment. I feel like haters are receiving the highest honors. The hate economy. Yes, the hate economy is powerful. It's powerful. If it'll win you Grammys, it'll get you the Super Bowl, it'll get you a lot of money.
Mapenzi haina pesa.
Mapenzi haina pesa, kuwa mtu wa chuki. Unajua, Wairi alishasema, lean into it. So the last thing I'd say is, I think one of the most tragic things we saw is Kenya's Goliath, yeah. So he said he was not being abused. Yeah. He was not being mistreated, and as much as we would like to respect that, that has a history. It has a very problematic history, like how Africans are treated, and people just seeing that out in the open. It has a very harmful history in the African context where I don't remember the name of the lady.
There was Sarah Bartman.
Yes.
She was a Khoi, woman, buxom, very buxom as African women tend to be.
Yes.
She then gets taken to a museum in Belgium and essentially just fetishized.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think this is an extension of that. It's the fetishization of African bodies and him having that experience and just feeling like it's for entertainment sets a very dangerous precedent. I know comedy is subjective and people just watch it for entertainment, but at the same time, you can still do comedy while embracing dignity for yourself and like for the people who look like you. Yeah. Because our history sometimes does not allow us to engage in a certain way. Yeah. So that's very sad. But like the last thing I'll say is regarding the water buffaloes that are now going to be in the meat. Yeah. Meat line or
like the edible animals.
Yes.
That what the water buffalo is going to be part of that. And I looked around and I was like, do we have any water buffalo in Kenya?
Yeah, because there are no water buffaloes in Kenya. Water buffaloes, I think, are of Asian origin. And our meat exports are getting crazy. You know, like we are venturing into, is this game meat?
It's game meat to an extent, but they're saying it's a domesticated one. But for me, what I wondered about was, we don't have water buffalo in Kenya. Yes. So if it's not indigenous to Kenya, why are you making it legal?
Yes.
Secondly, we have a very clear approach with regard to the hunting of game. This stopped in the 70s, and there's a reason that we did that. So unless we are signaling a shift, because the first time I read it, I was like, okay, is this just a regular buffalo? And what we're looking at is trying to cull, buffalo populations. On the one hand, that sounds like a logical, plausible thing. But water buffalo, I was like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
Did you see what I just did
there? Yes, I saw what you did there. 3 times. Shout out to you. But to this point, I think all the buffalo soldier will have to come together to stop this. I'm sorry, that was cheap.
No, that's why you're the comedian.
Yeah, that was cheap, but I had to do it. Yeah.
Justine, great conversation. I really loved how we've set the agenda for February. This month is going to be an interesting one. In America, Black History Month. Also in America, the trade and tariffs wars. Like I said, that's something to look out for. It's already having repercussions economically if those things are carried through. There's a lot to think about here with IEBC. The people are throwing their hats in the ring to become the next commissioners and chairpersons.
Do you think they'll allow people who are at Mandamano to become IEBC commissioners?
Can you imagine? That's a question. Did you or any of your children attend Mandamano in June? If so, why? If so, did they go to KFC after? And then I'll just stick
Are they in the Illuminati? That is a fun question. I'll be like, yes. And if you deny me my rights, you are going against the Kenyan Constitution.
But anyway, so there's a lot for us to look forward to, both internationally and locally. We'll try and keep tabs on everything. Hopefully, Tom wa Daladala atakuwa amerudi kutoka Dar es Salaam, and we will all be back together here with new guests, interesting conversations on the big picture, help you plan your week ahead and look at Africa through a new light. That's part of our mission here at Africa Uncensored. My name is John Allen Namu, and her name is?
I'm Justine.
Yeah, we'll see you next week. Thank you very much for joining us. Catch the podcast dropping, the audio podcast dropping on Apple and on Spotify every day after our show from 11 a.m. Subscribe, share the show, critique it, and help us get better. But just join us on this journey.
Mostly critique Jan.
Mostly ignore Justine. Kwaherini. Bye bye.
Bye.